All right, get ready to dive into some fascinating stuff today because we're going to be looking at the story of Jesus.
But we're not just looking at the biblical narrative we all know.
Right.
We're going a little bit further afield and taking a look at Jesus in India.
Okay.
A book written by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
So what's this book all about? What's the main idea?
The central claim is that Jesus actually survived the crucifixion and traveled east to India.
Whoa, hold on. Survived the crucifixion. That's a big claim.
Yeah, it's a bold statement.
How does he back that up? What kind of evidence are we talking about?
He pulls from a bunch of different sources, like scriptural analysis, historical accounts, and even some medical texts.
Interesting, okay.
He actually points to a passage in the Gospel of Matthew,
Okay.
where Jesus compares his time in the tomb to Jonah being swallowed by a whale.
I see. So he's drawing a parallel there between Jonah surviving the whale and Jesus survived the crucifixion.
Exactly, suggesting that they both faced these extreme hardships but ultimately lived.
Okay.
And he also brings up the point that Jewish tombs back then weren't like the graves we might picture today. They were more like chambers, which could have made survival possible.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So we've got scriptural analysis, we've got these historical accounts. Any other sources that he brings into play?
Yeah, he talks about travelers that visited the regions where Jesus supposedly traveled.
Okay.
And how they observed things like Jewish features and customs among the people living there,
Oh, that's interesting.
suggesting a connection to the lost tribes of Israel.
Okay, so for those of us who need a refresher, who are the lost tribes of Israel?
So there were 12 tribes that made up the ancient kingdom of Israel, and 10 of those tribes were dispersed after being conquered by the Assyrians.
Right.
And their whereabouts have been a source of much speculation.
So some ended up in India? Is that what he's suggesting?
That's the argument, that some of them at least settled in the Kashmir region.
Okay.
And he cites François Bernier, a French physician,
Yeah.
who wrote about his travels in the Mughal Empire. And in his writings, he supports this idea that the people in Kashmir could be descendants of those lost tribes.
Interesting. So there's at least a historical basis for saying that those tribes could have been in that region.
Yeah.
What would have been the point of Jesus going all the way to India, though? Why seek them out?
Well, Ahmad suggests that Jesus' mission was to bring those scattered tribes back together, to reunite them with their spiritual roots.
So a mission of reconnection.
Exactly.
But if he did go to India, is there any proof he actually made it there? What kind of evidence is there?
Well, he points to some ancient coins discovered in the Punjab region of India.
Okay.
One of them actually has Jesus' name on it, written in Pali script.
Wait, polyscript?
Yeah, it's an ancient Indian script.
Interesting. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
So finding Jesus' name on a coin from that time and place, that's pretty intriguing.
Absolutely. It suggests at least some level of awareness or maybe even reverence for him in that area.
Yeah, that's a pretty compelling piece of evidence. So we've got the scriptural analysis, we've got the historical accounts, even some archaeological findings. Anything else Ahmad brings to the table?
He delves into the Gospel of Barnabas.
Okay.
This is an ancient text that's not part of the traditional Bible,
Oh, really?
but it offers a different take on things. It claims that Jesus wasn't actually crucified.
Okay, a different gospel. How come this one isn't as well known?
Well, it's not included in those canonical Gospels that make up the New Testament.
Ah, I see.
But it's still an ancient text that gives us a different perspective on what happened to Jesus.
Very cool. So that really challenges the traditional story, right?
Yeah, it really makes you rethink things.
So if we entertain this idea that Jesus did survive and went east, how does that fit in with India's spiritual landscape with Hinduism and Buddhism?
Now that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
He draws some really fascinating parallels between Jesus's teachings and Buddha's teachings.
Okay.
Like both of them emphasized similar moral ideas, things like loving your enemies, and they both used parables to teach.
Wow, yeah, I never really made that connection before.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So is he saying that there was some kind of influence or connection between them?
Well, he points to a prophecy in a Buddhist text called the Kakavati Sutanta.
All right.
And this text mentions a Bhagwamataya, which means a white messiah or traveler
Okay.
who would appear after Gautama Buddha.
Interesting.
And he raises the question, could this be referring to Jesus?
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
A prophecy in a Buddhist text that could be about Jesus. Anything else that supports that idea?
He points to the fact that the word Mashi,
Okay.
which means Messiah, appears in 7th century Buddhist books from Tibet.
Okay.
And this term isn't originally a Buddhist term.
Interesting.
So that kind of suggests some blending of ideas, right?
Right, like some knowledge of Jesus made its way into Buddhist thought.
Yeah.
Wow, okay, my mind is spinning. Biblical references, historical accounts, archaeological findings, Buddhist prophecies. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
This is really fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
So we've only just scratched the surface here.
Right.
There's a lot more to unpack, and we'll do that when we come back.
And there's so much more to uncover.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, there are all those historical texts that
Yeah.
back up this whole idea of those lost tribes migrating to the region.
Right, okay.
And then you have accounts from travelers who actually saw these people firsthand, and they observed all these Jewish features and customs among Afghans and Kashmiris.
So we're like putting together a historical puzzle here.
Exactly.
With these little clues scattered across different cultures and time periods.
It really is like a historical detective story.
I love it.
Trying to piece it all together.
Okay, so tell me more about these historical texts. What are we talking about specifically?
Well, there's one called Rawzat-us-Safa,
Okay.
which is a pretty well-known Persian historical text.
Okay.
And it mentions Jesus traveling eastward.
Interesting.
And then you have all these different tribes in Afghanistan,
Right.
like the Beni Israel, the Ali Kostan, and the Kaladaka. They all claim descent from the Israelites.
So we have multiple sources from different cultures all pointing to this presence of Israelites in these regions.
Exactly.
But are there any accounts from people who actually saw them? Not just these historical texts, but people who were there?
Yes, those traveler accounts I mentioned earlier,
Right.
they describe these Jewish features and customs being observed among Afghans and Kashmiris.
Okay.
And these accounts come from pretty respected figures like Dr. Bernier, who we mentioned before,
Right.
and another traveler named Forster.
So these travelers were picking up on these cultural and physical traits that link these people back to ancient Israel.
Yeah, it's like following a trail of breadcrumbs through history.
Yeah, leading us to this very unexpected place.
And when you connect it to the bigger picture, it really starts to paint a clearer picture of Jesus's possible mission. It wasn't just about preaching to the people in Judea. He may have been trying to reconnect with those scattered tribes, bring them back into the fold.
Okay, so this is starting to sound less like a fringe theory and more like a legitimate historical possibility.
Yeah.
But is there any physical evidence, anything concrete, that supports this idea of Jesus actually being in India?
Well, there is one very interesting piece of the puzzle.
Oh.
It's called Marham-i-Isa.
Okay, Marham-i-Isa. What is that?
It means ointment of Jesus.
An ointment. What does an ointment have to do with Jesus's journey to India?
Well, this ointment is specifically mentioned in a lot of different historical medical texts,
Okay.
both from Europe and Asia,
Interesting.
and they describe it as a healing balm and explicitly link it to Jesus.
So why would an ointment be named after Jesus unless it was used to treat him?
Exactly.
Makes sense.
So Ahmad argues that the very existence of this ointment kind of adds more weight to the theory that Jesus survived the crucifixion.
Right, because he would have needed healing after such a traumatic event.
Precisely.
This is fascinating. We've gone from biblical analysis to historical accounts to traveler observations, and now we're looking at medical text.
Yeah.
It's like putting together a complex puzzle with pieces from all over the world.
And what's amazing is that all these pieces seem to fit together.
Yeah.
It challenges the traditional narrative and makes us consider these alternative possibilities.
It's definitely making me rethink everything I thought I knew about the story of Jesus.
Yeah.
It all makes you wonder, if he did make it to India, what kind of impact did he have there?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
If we accept Ahmad's theory, it completely changes how we understand how different faiths and cultures developed in the region.
Right, like we're talking about potential influences on Buddhism, Hinduism, even Islam. This could rewrite our understanding of religious history.
Exactly. The implications are huge.
So before we go any further, just remind our listeners, what's the book we're discussing here and where can they find it?
Sure, the book is called Jesus in India by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, and you can find it online at www.alislam.org.
Okay, thanks for that. Now let's get back to this idea of Jesus potentially influencing Islam.
So Ahmad argues that Jesus' message of love, peace, and submission to God's will, it really resonates with the core principles of Islam.
Okay.
He points to Jesus' emphasis on forgiveness and compassion, which lines with the Islamic emphasis on mercy and justice.
So he's highlighting these shared values between the two faiths.
Exactly.
But what about the differences? Because Christianity and Islam do have some pretty distinct theological viewpoints, right?
They do, but Ahmad believes those differences are often exaggerated or misinterpreted.
Okay.
He argues that the true message of Jesus, as revealed in the Quran, is in harmony with the teachings of Islam.
So he's suggesting that Islam is a continuation or a fulfillment of the message that Jesus brought.
Precisely.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is.
It must challenge some traditional views within both Christianity and Islam.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why Ahmad's work is so fascinating and controversial.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to challenge established dogma and present a new way of understanding the relationship between these major religions.
It sounds like he's calling for a more nuanced and interconnected view of religious history,
Yes, exactly.
rather than seeing them as these separate isolated entities.
He's advocating for a more holistic understanding of faith,
Right.
one that recognizes the underlying unity and shared purpose of all divine revelations.
This is a lot to process.
It is.
We've gone from exploring the possibility of Jesus surviving the crucifixion and traveling to India to uncovering these potential connections between his teachings and the development of Islam.
Right.
It's like pulling on a single thread and unraveling a whole tapestry of history, spirituality, and interconnectedness. Yeah, it really is mind-blowing when you think about how interconnected these seemingly different spiritual paths could be.
It really makes you realize that sometimes our understanding of history and religion can be limited by our own perspectives and what we think we already know.
Right.
When we challenge those assumptions and look at things from a different angle, we might find a whole world of new possibilities.
Absolutely. So if we accept this idea that Jesus' teachings did have a big influence on the development of Islam, where does that leave us? What does it mean for how we understand these two faiths today?
Well, I think it encourages us to look beyond those service-level differences that we often focus on
Right.
and try to see the deeper spiritual truths that connect us.
Yeah.
It's about starting a dialogue based on mutual respect, understanding, and trying to find common ground.
It's like realizing that two languages that sound totally different might actually come from the same root.
Exactly.
And that kind of understanding could help us communicate on a deeper level.
And I think that's so important in the world today,
Yeah.
where religious divisions can cause so much conflict and misunderstanding.
So it sounds like Ahmad is almost presenting a path towards interfaith harmony.
I think that's a good way to put it.
It's based on recognizing those shared origins and the interconnectedness of these different spiritual traditions.
He believed that a deeper understanding of the true message of Jesus, as revealed in the Quran, could really bridge the gap between Christianity and Islam,
Right.
and that could lead to more unity and peace in the world.
That's a really powerful message.
It is.
But I imagine it's also a challenging one for people who really hold on to those traditional interpretations of their faith.
Absolutely. Change is always tough, especially when it comes to our beliefs.
Right.
But Ahmad's work offers a valuable perspective. It asks us to question what we think we know, to explore new ideas, and to search for a deeper understanding of those spiritual truths that connect us all.
This whole deep dive has really been eye-opening.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's made me rethink what I thought I knew about history, religion, and just the interconnectedness of human experience.
It's fascinating stuff.
It really makes you realize how much there is still to learn and explore.
There's always more to discover and more questions to ask.
Absolutely. So for our listeners who are now just as fascinated by this theory as I am, where can they go to learn more about Hazrat Mirza Ghulam's work?
You can check out his book, Jesus in India, which is available online at www.alislam.org.
Perfect.
It's full of interesting historical analysis, scriptural interpretation, and thought-provoking arguments. I think you'll find it very engaging.
I'm sure I will. Well, there you have it, folks. We've taken a deep dive into a truly fascinating and thought-provoking reinterpretation of history and spirituality.
It's been a pleasure.
We explore the possibility of Jesus surviving the crucifixion, traveling to India, and even influencing the development of Islam. It's a theory that really challenges our conventional understanding of things and encourages us to think about the connections between different cultures and faiths.
It's all about expanding our horizons.
Exactly. So keep those minds open, keep exploring, and keep asking those tough questions. Until next time, happy diving.